Hi, everyone. So I'm Nicolas, Michel. Right.
Hi, everyone.
So thanks for being here, such a large number. I listened to most of the presentation today, and it's pleasing to see that most of the conclusions or the speeches are converging into one direction. So it means the industry is maturing and it's getting more educated. So it's really interesting to see. On the downside, I feel like I could be repeating what's been said today, so I'm going to try to not go over the topics that were covered today. So we were here last year to present the construction side of our project at Raglan Mine, a Glencore site. There you go. Where it was the part one of the presentation, where we covered the wind portion of it, the installation, the construction of the wind portion. Today, the topic of the speech will mostly be focused on the part two, which is the storage technologies. We have 3 storage components that were installed this summer and were commissioned. 2 out of 3 are commissioned at the moment, and that's what we're going to focus on. So quickly, where is Raglan? Well, Raglan is located up north in Nunavik, about the same latitude and same landscape as Liesel's Diavik. It's fully dependent on diesel. It can only be accessed by plane or by sea. Energy is the second largest cost, operating cost center at the mine. They are blessed with a 20-year mine life of mine and an amazing wind resource. So all the ingredients were there to propose a wind project. And we went over a similar process as Liesel talked about, where we analyzed different alternatives to diesel. And with the wind resource, when the wind measurement, we developed the business case, and it was very promising. But we had to be really persistent in terms of representations to the CEO, to the executive levels, to make sure they understand what's the value proposition in renewable. And after several presentations, we got it through, and we got the project approved, and we could finally move forward with construction. Well, the challenges, I think that's the part I'm going to kind of go quickly over because it's really remote. It can be treated pretty much as an offshore project where accessibility is really restrained. You have a short window of construction. There's no Canadian Tires around the corner. Globally, you have really harsh conditions. We have to be able to operate up to minus 40 degrees Celsius. We had last year, was it last year? We had an average yearly temperature of minus 11 degrees. So when over 12 months, your average temperature is minus 11, it's kind of cold. You're within a mining operation, so the constraints are, operational constraints are different than when you're supplying utility grid. Most of the clients most of the projects we're looking at, and specifically this one, they're recovering the heat from the genset. So that's a factor you got to take into account where you replace conventional diesel power with renewable. You're removing heat from the glycol loop, which heats the room temperature, the water, and that has to be filled by a different means of heat source. So those types of constraints and challenges. The project itself, well, it's one wind power. It's a one wind turbine, a 3 megawatt Enercon, so the E82 model. It's a 78 meter up height. We have roughly 10 meter per second wind speed average. It generates power on the microgrid of Raglan through a 25 kV distribution grid. That portion was up and running last year by the end of August. It's been producing for, we have the results on the next slide, for 13 months. And the new portion is the 3 storage technologies that you see. We have 200 kilowatt of lithium-ion batteries. We have a hydrogen loop of 200 kilowatt as well. And we have a flywheel of 250 kilowatt. The purpose of adding storage is really to demonstrate that we can achieve higher penetration with storage. It's a demonstration portion of the project. And we also want to discover what are the other benefits of storage. Because we already see that there might be other benefits than the conventional storage advantages that we anticipated. The results to date, so after 13 months, we have a turbine availability of 96.2%. That is very pleasing to us for the first year of operation in those conditions. Part of the success of this is we decided to have 2 Enercon trained employees that works for the on-site contractor. So what they do is, as soon as there's something wrong with the turbine, they can go right away and make sure that it's up, back and running. When they're not working on the turbine, because we made a deal with the on-site contractor, they're electrician, they're mechanicals, so they can go work on other work for the mine. So it's very efficient, very cost-effective for us to have this type of partnership with the on-site contractor at the mine in place. The production, 8.62 gigawatt hour for 13 months. We can see the learning curve of the power plant operators. In the first quarter, we only had 66% of wind power that could be integrated. It's normal. You tell the guy in front of his computer, now you're going to have a white thing spinning, and you're going to inject this in your grid. And what they want is really, they don't like change. Liesl talked a bit about how you got to help people. It's a psychological challenge. You really have to sit down with the power plant guys and educate them and let them know it's not that complicated. We're going to go through together. So here you can see the learning curve, 66%, 85%, and then after Q3, we reached 98%. We displaced 2.12 million liters of fuel with only one turbine and GHG emission reduction of more than 6,000 tons. All of this with a flawless safety track record. So that's good. Michel, maybe you can talk on the graph.
Yeah, just in February, this is the lowest production in the blue rectangle. In February last year, it was one of the coldest winter in 50 years at Raglan. The temperature was essentially always below 33 degrees. We reached minus 42. And the wind turbine is designed to operate between minus 30 and minus 40. So the power was derated between 30 and minus 40, but it was fully functional. And when it reached minus 40, it stopped, and we lost 4 days of power because of the cold. And when the temperature went back to minus 35, the wind turbine started again. So very robust technology, and really last winter we appreciated to be back running instead of losing a full month of operation. We just lost few days.
Okay, so here's the storage part of the project. It's also a good example of what Mars would look like in winter, I'm assuming. So really, as you can see, there's no obstacle for the wind. The fetch is really long, so that's why we have such a good wind resource. So that's the storage pad. On this pad, you have all the components. If you start from the right, you have the hydrogen loop with the electrolyzer, the fuel cells, and the big storage tank, the 3 bullet tanks. Just to make sure everyone understands how the hydrogen loops works, is we're injecting renewable energy into the electrolyzer, which takes the water and separates the water, oxygen, hydrogen. We pump the hydrogen into the storage tanks, and when we need, we pump it back to the fuel cell that regenerates electricity from hydrogen. So it's a long-term storage solution, and we're going to touch a bit about the specificity of all the storage component a bit later. Further up, you have the battery system in the smaller containers, a 20-foot container, and then you have the flywheel and the electrical substation further left. Maybe the challenges on the storage was, of course, again, the logistic and the shipping part, where, and before the commissioning, we had to keep everything warm because it's sensitive electronics, and the fluids in there, they have to not freeze. So when you ship on the boat, and when they were there, they were sitting on the pad for a couple months before they were commissioned. So you need to keep everything warm. We have to have hazardous material and hazardous liquid coming up to clean the like acid and stuff like that. So you need emergency response plan just to commission the whole storage plant. You need specialized labor to weld the piping, the high-grade stainless steel piping for hydrogen. All these types of things, even the foundation for the flywheel, where usually a flywheel sits in a concrete base, but for us, we put all the buildings on piles because you want the wind to go under, so there's no snowbanks accumulating for meters and meters. But that brought constraints on the structure design for the flywheel, where we needed to make sure the vibration and the strength of the structure could sustain the flywheel when it's spinning. So all these types of challenges were new to us. Handling of the containers, for those of you who work on a mining site, we pick the containers and we literally dump them everywhere. They're all over the sites, and sometimes we lose containers on site. That's also impressive when, hey, I have a genset. Where is it? Oh, geez, I don't know. It's in one of these containers. So they didn't know that these containers had millions of dollars of equipment in there, and they mishandled one. So we had to take that container back to the manufacturer. He retested the whole thing to make sure everything was working fine. So generally, very high-tech equipment in a mining environment, you need to be extra careful because you never know how it's going to end up on site. That's something we learned. You have something to add on this?
No, go.
Oh, no. Well, it's your turn.
Okay. So the energy storage component, it's a demonstration project which we're trying to enable high penetration. At Raglan, the initial plans was to look at how can we replace 50% of the diesel, but let's do that in a de-risk fashion. Let's start with a one wind turbine and different energy components. So each storage has its own functionality, and each has its capability of enabling higher penetrations. One of the things is, so in terms of the components, we have the flywheel, the battery, the hydrogen loop, which are different time scales in terms of storages. Flywheel is about 25 seconds, the lithium-ion battery 75 minutes, and the hydrogen is of the order of 20 hours with 4 megawatt hour. All of this needs to be dispatched on the grid. We need to know when to charge and discharge according to certain algorithm. So HatchUp developed a microgrid controller that does that dispatch all automatically. So one of the things we learned from this is the specifications of the storage. There's this incredible amount of technology out there, and we need to be wise in the way we purchase those equipments. We need to specify the duty cycles. We need to specify the performance, how fast they're going to cycle. If you don't put that in your contract, you're going to be very disappointed and very surprised. Each vendors, even though they have the same names, lithium-ion or lead-acid batteries, everybody has different performances. You have to put that in the contract. Otherwise, it will underperform. All these things cycles and heats up. Even if it's in the Arctic, it does heat up. And you will have a degradation of your performances. So those are the things we've learned. Even though it has been operating for a month, just going through the FAT and the SAT and all these things, we learned tremendously about the importance of scoping these things properly. Now, we look at storages with 3 use cases. So first, storage as a backup. So the battery can be used as additional spinning reserve. If you look at the graph, you'll see that on the left-hand side, the wind power is fairly constant, above an average of 2 megawatt. That allows the operator to say, oh, well, we feel safe that we can stop a genset now because the wind power is fairly stable. But suddenly, on the right-hand side, you see that there's a 1 megawatt drop in power, in wind power, very suddenly, and within that minute, now the wind power is producing less by 1 megawatt average. The genset doesn't have time to start within 1 minute in that case. The Raglan, it takes 10 minutes. So the battery as backup power allows you to provide the power the time it takes to start the genset. So that's one very specific use case that enables high penetration. The second use case is excess of energy. The more you've got renewable power on the grid, the more likely you will have occasions where the wind or solar power is greater than the load. So you lose your power. You cannot produce that power. So you have excess wind power in this case, and you need storage to keep it. So that's a very specific business case. The business case of saying, what do I do with my excess? You can leave it as is, or you can try to store as much as you can. So in this particular example, the green curve is the potential wind power, and the red is what has been integrated. The difference is the excess wind power. So 300 kilowatt over few hours, you get to 7.2 megawatt hour that you need to store if you want to store all the energy. So that's a second use case of energy storage. The third one has to do with improving power quality on the grid. The wind power is highly variable. As you can see from the red curve, you've got wind power dips, you've got wind power drops. I mean, the particular at Raglan, you've got one wind turbine, so you do lose 3 megawatt of power once in a while because of icing, because of an electrical default, or because of a temperature raise. You don't lose it for long, but it's 3 megawatt of power you lose. So what do? You want to keep your grid stable. You need the power quality to be improved. So by using flywheel or batteries, you can smooth out the power quality. So that's a third enabler of high penetration. So when we look at dispatching all those components all together through our microgrid controller, you see that the blue curve is what the wind power produced. So it varies all over the place from 3 megawatt to 2.5 megawatts, go back to 3, goes back to 2, and back and forth. Once you process that with the energy storage, that charge and discharge in the exactly at the appropriate moment within fractions of a second, you've got the red curve as the output of your energy storage plus wind power component. So the ramp that you see, instead of being 130 kilowatt per second, goes down now to less than 11 kilowatt per second. So the signal is much smoother, giving much time for the gensets to react, and then keeping the voltage and the frequency on the grid. So one of the very important thing when you're operating on a remote location is predictability and operability. So you don't want to surprise the operator with things like losing 3 megawatt of power on a grid. So you need to predict as many things as you can, such that when you operate, the grid is always maintained. You never want to lose your grid. Losing your grid is when there's a power drop, when there's a frequency drop, which may stop all the operation of the mine. To avoid that, well, you need to track on a day-to-day basis, on an hour-by-hour basis, what's happening. So hourly wind forecast is very helpful, has been implemented as a site. The wind turbine icing is being calculating in real time, so we have predictions on when icing accumulation is going to go above a certain limit, and the wind turbine stops, so we can warn the operators with a sound alarm that tells them to watch out. We've got automated wind curtailment when it's needed, which allows the operator to go off the screens and do some maintenance, but knowing that the automatic mode will guarantee to maintain the grid stability. We've got automated emails for alarms that are being sent and dispatched to the south, such we are on a 24-hour alert if anything is happening. We don't want to lose wind power. So those are very sensitive for the operator.
Yeah, and maybe to point out, at the beginning, it's hard to engage the operators and everyone on site, but once the thing is up and running and they like it, then they want more out of it. And they were the one telling us, hey, we should have this, we should have that. So when we first started sending a trial of daily emails with the forecast for the week, it was just a trial, and not even a week and a half after we received an email, this is now mandatory, we have to have it. So they were really happy to have the tools to extract more out of the wind turbine. And at the end of the day, on their side, they also have KPIs on the cost of $1 per kilowatt hour produced at the mine. So they want to look good, and we have to help them to look good in terms of achieving their targets on cost for power generation. So, yeah. Some takeaways, well, that project up to this point allowed us to gain significant expertise and experience and know-how on wind power, on storage technologies in a mining environment. We don't want the grid to collapse. We don't want blackouts. We don't want the load shedding system to trigger. Those are all things that when you provide the electricity to the grid, it's not as critical as it is for a mining operations. And for those of you who know, when, let's say, the whole process circuit stops, sometimes you have to go with a shovel and remove the rocks out of the conveyor to restart the whole thing because it's clogged. So these type of things have to be taken into account when you develop renewable energy for a mining project. So from project development to financial modeling, FEED, I would add legal in there because the legal portion of having an IPP selling to a mining company is important. Michel talked about the contractual side with the vendors. For the selling of electricity, that's an important part as well. So project construction, commissioning, operation and maintenance. You cannot just deliver a project and go back home when it's operate. You have to hold hands with the operators and educate them and let them know that you're there to support how they operate, answer the questions. Provide tools for wind predictability, and that is key to higher wind penetration. Yeah, the learning curves of the power plant, I talked about it. And now we can say that this and Diavik and those type of projects, we're happy to say that we've paved the way for other renewable project up north in mining environment, not necessarily up north, but in microgrids in mining environment. And I think that's it. Thank you.